to another episode of Media Watch. We continue to bring you the shows from home, so that's why maybe we should call them the home edition. And I've got a wonderful guest this week, probably the most busiest man in the UK, I think, or probably the world. Very difficult to get hold of, but I'm so glad that he has spared some time for us this week, or for the next 24 minutes, to talk about his really exciting role and quite a few themes that emerge from the discussion that we're going to have with regards to media, his representation in terms of being a senior in the industry, and also we'll talk about some of the hobbies that he's been up to during lockdown because he has so much spare time. So, Indy Hothi, welcome to the show. How are you?
Rugby Khalsa, thanks for having me, Dr. Savvy. Really appreciate it.
No, it's good to see you. And I know you're a really good Instagrammer, social media person, but more importantly, Vice President. I want to steal your thunder. Tell me all about the Chartered Accountants Association of Scotland. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, so one of the oldest professional bodies that represents accountants around the world, and I'm the vice president for that organisation. So very much a senior executive role representing the profession in the UK and around the world, and representing the interests of our members, but also looking at the accounting and auditing profession and the business profession as a whole, and what the future holds for it over the next 2 to 3 decades in the future.
And it's probably quite a challenging time now, isn't it? Because a lot of the counters, the pointers, have been reset. I know we didn't touch on it earlier when we had the discussion, but it's a challenging time we hope post-pandemic, in the context of if you look at the finance systems, people's earnings, the fact that there's been money that's been available now all of a sudden from the government to help people with all those years of austerity, all of that effectively is resetting things. Do you think there's any lessons that we can learn from the pandemic from about 100 years ago, where we saw a little bit of a hockey stick situation, but there was still a lot of poverty that emerged during that period?
You're completely right. It's affected all walks of life. So, the way we live, the way businesses operate, the way governments operate. And if we sort of honed in on the way businesses operate, and as the Institute, we're sort of supporting our members and navigating this global pandemic as a society together, what we're starting to see is businesses are really thinking about how do they shift their operations. We're becoming a much more digital society. So we've, transformed in the space of 6 months what would have maybe taken, 10 to 20 to 30 years, in the way we have to now leverage technology more than ever before. And how do we then bring everyone on that journey, right? So how do we bring in those people who maybe aren't so technologically savvy? How do we bring them along on that journey? And then also as chartered accountants, as a profession, these are individuals that are supporting businesses. They are analysing the figures, the facts, the numbers, and helping, being real business advisors, right? And so they play a crucial role now in terms of navigating this, because whilst this has been seen before, like you mentioned, a global pandemic over 100 years ago, over the last 60 to 70 years, an economic impact such as this, an economic shock such as this, has never been seen before. It is uncharted territory in a certain respect, and so it's going to require real innovation, real rigor in terms of the way we operate to really come through this in a better shape.
And do you think that, like you were saying, it's a time of innovation? I remember that when I interviewed, as one of my, I had a great opportunity. Somebody invited me and said that Reverend Jesse Jackson visiting from New York, and it was the time of the crash, the stock market crash, and a lot of the individuals that were basically losing their houses. Getting tapped by a fly here. Wants to be on in the act, fly on the wall. A lot of the people that were losing their houses, and one of the statements I remember, it was part of this thing called the Rainbow Coalition, and he said, accountants can be creative if they want to be creative. And it wasn't a kind of a jibe necessarily at the banking industry, saying they were very easy to lend money and very easy to grab back the houses when people couldn't afford it. But he was saying that people could also be creative when it comes to maybe giving them opportunities to pay back over a longer period. because obviously that introduces stress. So I think your point about innovation is spot on, actually. A lot of the issues surrounding the take up of technology and those that are kind of trailers in there. Look at the doctors, the amount of time that they would say, well, you could have video conferencing, and now they've jumped on that kind of facility. A lot more efficient meetings. It has a sustainability impact as well, doesn't it? People don't have to fly all over the world.
Yeah, and of course, and I think there's much more there to unpack. So for businesses thinking about how they operate, and the fact that so many people are now working remotely, whereas before culturally in some industries they were either technology agnostic or really weren't bought into the fact that teams can work remotely. And a lot of organizations started that from you would say, well, actually we meant that 50 or up to 75% of our employees will now be working remotely, and you've got large multinationals saying, well, we're a global company, and if all of our employees are based in one country or one region in the world, then that isn't reflective of the global society that we serve or the customers that we serve. So all of a sudden they're starting to adopt some of these new elements, especially when it comes to digital technology. But as you mentioned, the big impact on the side of that is really around sustainability as well, something I'm very, very passionate about. And if you think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, businesses more broadly also thinking about what is their purpose, right? So traditionally it's always been about the bottom line, profit making, how are we supporting our shareholders? But the conversation has now shifted, especially with the global pandemic, which has really accelerated this conversation around how do businesses really support the broadest set of stakeholders. So are they thinking about the environment? Are they thinking about the local community? Are they thinking about the governments that they work with? And so how can they really incorporate all of that? So at the start of the pandemic, you saw businesses really rush to support society and support their local communities. For example, there are so many businesses that reshifted their manufacturing and production to create PPE equipment or antibacterial products. And we're starting to see more of that now as businesses say, well, actually, what is our vision? What are our values? Why did we start in the first place? It isn't just about making money, but actually also being ethical in the way we do it and doing good for the planet. So there's that broader discussion that I'm really glad is starting to come into play for businesses and for society as a whole.
I think it's an interesting area where you see that a multinational, obviously it depends on the size of the organization. Even if you're a small company, you can do wonders in terms of, lead the way. So, there is that element too. But definitely the larger organizations, I've seen situations where some people are introducing the fact that maybe if there's two companies, rather than having two separate offices, they operate at the same office, but certain days of the week they're there, and the other days of the week the other company are there. But my question I was going to ask you, and I know you've done some great charity work for Khalsa Aid and other organizations, you are definitely also an inspiration in terms of being a humanitarian. Great work there. I was going to say that, do you think that multinationals have enough power to influence governments to be able to change
country, for example? So there's significant influence there, and so there are positives and there are negatives to that. But I definitely think businesses have a part to play in this, especially coming out of the pandemic. How do governments, how do businesses, and how do communities, and how do individual people all work together? Because there is a knock-on impact of anything that happens here, right? So if a government decides to put in a new policy, that would then impact banks, would then impact all businesses, would then impact communities, and then people, and then there'll be a cyclical effect going back to them as well. So we have to realize we're living in an interconnected world, and that solutions cannot just come from one space, and that there needs to be a collaborative effort. Whilst this may seem very, very obvious, in practice it isn't always the case. And now this pandemic has brought a lot of stakeholders together in certain respects, and around how can we really work to the common good. There are also plenty of examples showing negative impacts of people being much more nationalistic or taking protectionist measures as well. So don't get me wrong, but I think overarchingly we start to see much more collaboration and much more innovation, which I think definitely is the right way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And I think also, you mentioned in terms of getting the message out, I know you and I have both got something in common. I've been doing it since 2004, and now Tom, Harry, and Jane wanted to do a podcast. There's also the right way of doing it and the wrong way of doing it, but that's a different story. But I know that you're leading the way within your organisation to help put together a podcast where people really do get the meaning behind the message, rather than just here's a bunch of text and here's a bunch of information that we're reading out to you. So innovation is also through comms as well, isn't it? What's your personal view on the podcasting space? Is it being overrun? Is it back to thousands? Where can I find the most useful one?
There's definitely a huge growth in podcasts. I think that's a positive thing. The question then comes about choice and trying to find the right quality content. I'm very fortunate to have been, working with ICAS to launch what is the CA Agenda podcast. So I'm interviewing business leaders, from a number of different sectors around their thoughts around specific areas, which is very, very important. The reason why I really like podcasts, if you think about media and the way it's consumed today, the content and the length of that content is getting shorter and shorter, primarily driven by social media. Now, you've got videos that are in generally 1 to 3 minutes in length. You can't really get deep into a topic. You're only really talking around headlines there. And actually, with a podcast, which could range from half an hour to an hour long, you can really dig deep into those conversations. You can have those type of conversations that you would have with an individual on a one-to-one basis, which is really useful, and then can broadcast that to the entire world, which I think is hugely powerful. And especially now, where a lot of face-to-face events and meetings cannot happen, I think the importance of podcasts has only just increased, and I think it's a question of finding something that you're interested in and then using that platform. So I'm a big fan of podcasts. I think that one-to-one piece is very, very important, but I completely agree with you. There's been a huge explosion, which is fantastic, but then for a consumer who's trying to find the right podcast and trying to find content that's relevant to them and of value to them, it does become a little bit more difficult in that regard.
Well, one of the things that I've been doing on the side is I've been looking at curation. So it's a bit like when you go to a museum and you find set pieces that are spoken about. In the same way, there's an opportunity to maybe curate best content. And I know Spotify recently started to create playlists, but no one's actually taking it to another level where they'll look at the quality, as I said before, the meaning behind the message. It's half an hour long, but these are the themes, and by the time you get to the end of that half hour, because I think the problem that we have, and I think you've correctly pointed it out, which is this almost the term that's used is called attention economy. Everyone's vying for your attention. If they can get it for 5 minutes during a commercial break, or that, you're doing really well, right? But if you can get it for 45 seconds, then obviously that is a particular message that they've successfully managed to penetrate and bring home to you. But sometimes those subjects are not easily digestible, are they? I mean, I'm sure accounting is quite complex. I'm sure auditing principles are complex. Knock-on business, repercussions are complex. So it's very difficult to keep the subject interesting, right?
I think there's a piece there. And I will obviously say business and accounting and the auditing profession is very, very important and very, very interesting. But there is that view that auditing can be quite bland and boring, and it's really around how do you engage in that topic and how do you really talk about that topic. And it goes back to then how is that content curated? What type of conversations are you having? And I generally find conversations with people on a one-to-one basis quite interesting, right? Because it isn't a predefined speech or predefined content. It's actually a free flow conversation, and it can go down very different paths than you had initially expected, but that's how conversations happen. And that's one of the beauties of a podcast, say, versus news content or social media content, which is generally curated, can be edited for a specific message. And as you mentioned, with the piece around the attention economy, content is generally getting shorter and shorter to try and really penetrate through all of that noise around all the other messaging that you're getting to try and really get someone's attention. But then that drives behaviors of, those attention grabbing headlines, that clickbait that you see on all over the internet now, which, isn't there isn't there to be engaging for the long term, but it's actually just there to get your attention to click on something, which I also think, you know, is quite challenging. And for a lot of people that aren't digitally minded or digitally savvy, sorry for the pun there, but you know, they can fall foul of that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and there is obviously a danger. There's a dark side as well, isn't there? You know, the dark side of it being over commercial, or, and we spoke about it the other day actually, which was, you know, purely around this issue of diluting information, or genuine information, or quality information, or, you know, fake news, that kind of thing. Thought we lost you for a second there. Can you hear us okay?
It's become such an overused word, but such an important topic as well at the same time, especially in the political.
Yeah, especially
in the
political.
Okay? Should I start that again?
No, it's fine. Carry on. I think we caught that last word, which was, yeah, especially in the political context.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We don't normally have this problem.
Yeah, so you know, fake news. Okay. So fake news has become. So fake news has become such a big issue, especially in the political sphere. We're hearing about it all the time. It's really hard to differentiate between what's real and what is fake. So I completely agree with you there. It's a conversation which I think is going to define our generation until we get to the bottom of, you know, how we will structure the way we interact with the world around us, the data that we have, the internet as well, in terms of finding a balance of you know, truthful information and seeking the truth, which I hope we get to the bottom of sooner rather than later.
I had a really interesting phrase that somebody said to me the other day. They said that data is the new oil, right? I don't know if you heard that one before, but you know, from my perspective, when I look at data, because I'm in that industry as well, it's not about looking at the data and saying, well, that's interesting. It's actually acting on that, and then predictive analytics as well. There's a lot of research that's been done there, or reverse engineering, which is the dark side, where you're trying to figure out who is actually saying this and then targeting those individuals. That's the real negative aspect of, and legally, not a lot of that is actually picked up at the moment. I mean, if you were a lawyer in the kind of security industry, you would, you know, and in terms of data, you know, privacy, this is an area that's really developing right now. I think we have a delay on the line.
I completely agree. And if you add this, you know, advancements in terms of artificial intelligence into play as well, you're getting, you know, these AI software, AI machines that are being fed vast amounts of information that can then start to make a real judgment and insight around topics. And you know, I can say in our industry, we've been trialing software of AI programs that can actually create original written content. So can write articles, can write, you know, journal posts, blog posts with the right level of data, right level of insight and humor. So much so that in blind tests, it's actually really difficult to judge whether it's written by a person or a piece of AI software, which, you know, if you think about it, is really scary for some industries. If you think about print publishing, you think about, you know, books as well. If you think about blog posting on the internet, if it can all be automated to a certain degree, and the news industry itself as well, you know, where is the need for human input, and what about all the traditional roles that we've seen in society? So I definitely think there's a technological revolution there, and the whole piece around data being king is you know, the foundation and the foundation of that.
Absolutely. Listen, we got a few minutes left. I was just going to clear something on the screen. We have a few minutes left. I was going to ask you about the fact that you're so busy, you're doing so much, but I did notice recently you did a bit of gardening, you did a bit of gym building in your garden, and you did a fantastic job. What inspired you to put all of that together? Because hey, I'm certainly going to be coming around and you know, getting some veggies off you. You know.
more than welcome anytime. I think, you know, it started at the start of lockdown. I came to two realizations that, you know, I was in a very, very fortunate and privileged position to be able to try and make use of that time. Number one, for me, fitness is a big part of my routine, my mental health as well. And so I'd always been meaning to sort of set up a home gym, and that really spurred me on with, you know, all gyms closing. So that was one piece. But the new skill was really around gardening and growing vegetables. I realized that, you know, our and my ancestral heritage is in farming. And I've not had the ability also to connect with nature. So I don't really understand where my food comes from. So if someone showed me a potato plant before, I wouldn't know what it would even look like. And I decided, no, I want to, you know, learn something new. So I've got so many books, watching YouTube channels on, you know, building planters, growing some vegetables. So we've had some aloo, some gajar, we've had some shallia, some sweet corn, some cucumbers, aubergine, and some mircha as well. So we've grown quite a few different vegetables, and you know what, it's been a fantastic experience learning about nature, learning about all these different plants that you're growing, nurturing that as well, and realizing that it's a long-term piece. And then also just connecting, when I talked about earlier, connecting with the ancestral heritage. It was a great opportunity to talk to my BG, so my Nanny G, who I live with, and you know, she started sharing her tips. We had a little bit of a competition going on, so she started growing some vegetables and sharing, you know, some of her advice as well around that, which I think has been really, really nice. So it's been an amazing experience. We've had a really good harvest. So yeah, you're more than welcome to some aloo, some gajar as well. It's gonna make some nice sabji for yourself. But also at the same time, I think it's a skill and a hobby that is probably going to become a lifelong endeavor.
Yeah, don't forget to rotate those areas that you got, because apparently that's a rule, isn't it? You can't use the same area again, or you can use different crops. What do I know? I was going to say, it's so good to have you on board the show. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed your insights. I'm going to wish you all the best moving forward. It's a fantastic position that you've got. I think you're leading the way for a lot of people. You're giving a lot of hope. And it's a subject that we did touch on, maybe back to another day. You know, that kind of representation, you're definitely an inspiration for a lot of people. I hope to see you. Maybe we'll get your wife as well to join us next time, which is doing really well at the moment as well. We had her on our show a few years ago. So all my best to Jaspreet, and I will look forward to seeing you again, popping in to actually get some veggies off you. And in return, I'll bring the sabji made. How's that?
Thank you so much for having me, Savi. It's been an absolute pleasure. If anyone wants to connect with me, you can reach out to me in Indy Hothi. You know, big fan of trying to support people in our community who have interest either in, you know, professional careers or anything more broadly. If anything I can do to help, I would always do my best. And thanks again for having me.
That's great. No, thanks so much for tuning in this time around. Indy has also worked for Ernst & Young in the past, and you know, incredible organisation, management consultancy. He's done really well there, and that's where we first met actually. So we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for tuning in.